It says, let everyone know they've been recorded. Right, I'll start then. Hello, this is Louise and Adam, and welcome to Asking for a Friend. Hi, Adam, how are you?
Hello, Louise. I am very good. Had a very busy but enjoyable weekend.
Do anything interesting?
Yeah, quite a lot really. I've been working on the house. I bought a house last year, so I'm slowly renovating it.
Nice.
Also may have had a bit of a late night Friday. There was a band playing near me, and we stayed out till the early hours of the morning listening to the band.
Hey,
So
nice. I did exactly the same. I forgot. It's actually a band. My band, not my band. The band I went to see on Friday is it's somebody I knew through ex-JWs, and he got married. I went to his wedding, but not to an ex-JW. And they started going to like a little jam night in a pub, and I've set up a band, and they're amazing.
Excellent. What kind of stuff do they play?
They do covers. They do covers for people of a certain age. I'm going to say no more than that, but it's like really thumping, rocking stuff. The whole pub was up dancing. It was brilliant. And I'm going to give them a plug. If anyone lives around the Gloucestershire, Tewkesbury area, you got to go and see the Coppertinas. They're brilliant. Who was your band?
Cockatinas.
Coppertinas.
Coppertinas. Okay, well, I'll give my band a shout out as well.
Mm.
Might be a little bit harder to get to because I live in Shetland. There's a surprising amount of bands in Shetland. So this band that I went to on Friday night are called the Deadpans.
Mm-hmm.
There's three of them, a bass player, a drummer, and a guitarist lead singer. And they do pop and rock covers. So they played in a local pub on Friday night, and they were just absolutely superb. It always surprises me that there was a good mix in the pub, young, old, and the song that people always go crazy for is the ABBA song. As soon as they started playing ABBA, everyone went nuts. So, yeah, shout out to the Deadpans. You are superb, guys.
Sounds like we had exactly the same night in two separate places. So I've got two things to mention before we start, and one is the music that tops and tails this podcast, and that was also written by an ex-Jehovah's Witness called Simon Endicott. Hello, Simon. He kindly let me have snippets from his first song that he's released called You're Not Who You Say You Are. So that's really cool. And the other thing that I remembered to do this week that I forgot last week was we have an email address so people can contact us, and it is asking for a friend questions with an S on the end at outlook.com, but I'll put that in the show notes so people can message us.
We should probably just say, Louise, that if people want to email the email address that we have, we are happy not to read out your name.
Okay.
If you do it off, if you send us an email from your account, or if you want to make up a fake email account, then just do that. Obviously, because we're mindful that some folk might still be wanting to remain anonymous, shall we say?
Yeah, and asking for a friend. Good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we'll keep it all anonymous. So, the internet, Adam, do you think the advent of the internet has changed things for the witnesses?
I think it has, yes. I can remember when I left home at 21, which is back some time ago, the internet was only just beginning to take off. So I knew maybe a handful of people that had the internet in their home. But when I left my parents' home, we didn't have the internet. But I think in the following years, obviously the internet has gone from strength to strength, and we use it for everything now. It has affected the religion in a number of ways, really. Some negatively and some positively. What do you think?
Well, it was very noticeable at your dad's funeral that people don't have book bags anymore. They have an iPad, and they access everything on the iPad, don't they? The Bible, the songbook, the Watchtower, I'm guessing, although I didn't observe that because we didn't do the Watchtower at your dad's funeral. But I find that interesting because it means you can be sat in the hall with access to the internet.
It is kind of a bit mind-blowing for those of us that were brought up, you know, in the 1990s or before that, that we would be accessing the internet in the Kingdom Hall. But I guess for folk that are in the religion now, it's almost like it's always been there. I think the organization has been on the internet with its own website for possibly about 20 years now.
Right. And I know when you approach a cart, they will just direct you to their website. They don't really discuss things. So we used to have that reasoning from the scriptures book where we were encouraged to use the Bible to help people see the truth about whatever subject we were talking about. And it was quite in depth, that book. We used to take it to pre-field service and like pick a point that we were going to discuss, or it kind of had in fact I would get it out if somebody said something. You could get it out and go, oh well, here's like there's a quick answer and then there's a long answer. But now it's just like, look at our website.
That's it. You're absolutely right. There was a whole section in the reasoning book, conversation stoppers, how to deal with conversation stoppers.
I'm not interested.
Well, is it the Bible you're not interested in, or is it finding solutions to everyday problems? It'd be something like that.
Yeah, that's good. That is good. And yes, and we're schooled to try and engage people in a conversation, which I couldn't say definitively, but I sense that that's changed. When I've had witnesses come to my door, poor lady came accidentally a while ago, and she did kind of engage in conversation. So I suppose there is still some of that, but I do sense there's more of just go and look at the website, almost do your own research, which is a classic internet trope, isn't it? Do your own research.
Yes, and I think there's probably two groups of witnesses now. There's the older generation who have been there when you used to have in-depth conversations with people about your beliefs, and then there's the younger generation who have now been told direct people to the website, don't really get involved in deep discussions. So I think it's kind of polarized it a bit, I think.
And so what I'm wondering is, how does that sit with the advice not to look things up, not to research anything that's Jehovah's Witness associated that isn't from the organization? Because my story of what got me thinking is when I Googled the first time I typed, they say the first time you type Jehovah's Witnesses into the Google bar. And that's exactly what happened to me. I left still believing that it was the truth. I just didn't feel I could do it anymore. I didn't have the sheer energy and mental capacity to keep going. But I didn't for 1 minute think it wasn't the truth. And I think it was a few years after I'd left before I dared go to the Google bar with that particular search. But once I did, it took me about 48 hours to get a different perspective.
Okay.
So there's a dichotomy, isn't there, between using the internet and directing people to the internet and using it for all your resources, but also, is there still that thing that you're not allowed to look up stuff that might be wrong?
I think there very much is. So if I'm right in what you're saying there, you didn't Google the organization before you left.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
I think we were scared too, weren't we? We were
yes,
not to do that.
Yeah.
Because the place full of lies about the witnesses, and people were just trying to break down your faith with lies and dishonesties.
Yeah, and it was that same reasoning that we'd had. I mean, I'm older than you, so like right back from when I can remember, back in the 70s, when you used to get the odd protester with a banner outside the assemblies, and we were told, don't look, don't read, don't even read the placard, because apostate, and it'll rob you of your faith. And I remember as a child, like putting my hand up to one side of my face so I wouldn't look at the placard, and wondering what possibly could be so potent in a few words that it would completely rob me of my faith. What could they be saying that could be so kind of deceptive, but also sneaky and wrong, that I would not be able to see through it? Because the argument was, you won't see through it. It's too cunning. Like, you think you will, you think you're clever, but you'll never see through it, and it'll rob you of your faith. And you think, wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, I guess they've kind of tapped into the fake news thing before we even heard the phrase fake news. So from my perspective, probably quite similar to yours, when the internet was becoming mainstream in the UK, the organisation was starting to bring articles out that were saying, be very careful what you look at on the internet, because there's a lot of fake news, if you like. They didn't use that phrase, but there's a lot of false information about witnesses. So I think that was very much drilled into us. And I can very much remember feeling scared to research the organisation.
Yeah, same. And in fact, even you're dead right, it is a version of fake news. I was actually thinking that earlier when I was thinking about this podcast, and the phrase fake news popped into my head. But you're right, they'd utilised that concept years before, because I remember when there was a Panorama documentary coming out about witnesses. I think it was called Suffer Little Children, about the child abuse. And we were actually told from the platform not to watch it, because all the information that you might have seen that made you think was kind of weaponized as something really terrifying and fake, but not just fake news, not just it could be right, it could be wrong, dangerous fake news. And you're right, that concept is now quite mainstream, isn't it, because of the internet. And in fact, the internet is full of rubbish as well as all the good stuff, and it's really difficult for people to know what's right and what's not.
It is, yeah. I've got a confession to make. I watched that Panorama documentary was it back around 2001, 2002?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was quite an unusual period, because the letter that you mentioned just there was read out in all UK congregations on a Sunday at the Sunday meeting.
Was it?
And that's quite unusual, because normally letters like that would be read out at the midweek meeting.
Yeah.
So the letter was read out on the Sunday, and there was a lot of excited chatter about it after the meeting. People saying, "Oh, are you going to watch it? Are you going to watch it?" And I decided to watch it. And I watched the documentary, and I remember feeling quite worried, because I was due to be in the ministry the next day. I was a regular pioneer at this point.
Oh, heck.
And I remember feeling quite sort of unnerved that if there was someone who mentioned it, I really defend what had been covered in the documentary, because it was quite disturbing what the documentary. If anyone's not seen it, I think it is available on YouTube. It's called Suffer the Little Children, and it was basically looking into incidences of child abuse within the Jehovah's Witness congregations. So I can remember it being quite a scary time for us.
Did anybody mention it on the field service afterwards? Can you remember?
Not a single one. So I don't know what the viewing figures for the actual program was, but nobody mentioned it.
That's really interesting, because to my mind, you would have been better off watching it so that you could prepare a defence than to be completely ignorant of it and then be sidewinded on field service and look really uninformed about your own organisation.
Yes, because I think the general instruction from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is, don't go onto the internet to research Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's all lies.
It's all lies, yeah. Yeah,
Which
and
you
if there's
think,
if I mean before the internet, I remember being told that, if anything comes up on TV, if there's an item on the BBC or anything, it's just lies. There was something recently, a program recently. Oh, damn, I can't remember what it was, but I remember speaking to a current Jehovah's Witness, and all I did was quote the Bethel quote that they'd given to the program. And she said, "Oh, well, I've not watched that because they just put their side of it and they don't report the other side. So I didn't watch it." I said, "Well, that's why I've only mentioned the Bethel response to you, because that is only their words." Oh, damn, I can't remember what it was about. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting argument that they only put one side. But they always approach headquarters to engage with the program, and they always refuse. So
yeah,
that, you're always going to win on that, aren't you? If you refuse to engage with the program and you then tell everybody, well, they're only putting one side, they're not putting our side.
it's ridiculous when you think about it, isn't it? It really is. Just going back, Louise, to what you were saying before, how many years was it after you left that you started to research on the internet?
I've told myself a story, and it's so long ago now that I don't know if I've just invented a narrative or if it's true. To me, it feels like it was a few years before I dared to put anything in the Google bar. But also, by the same token, I am aware that around about after 2000, I was talking to people on an old discussion board called JWD. So I must have found something, and I was talking, and that was all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was talking to people, but perhaps still not a believer, but not a believer, just in that middle land in between,
Purgatory.
where I was perhaps, yeah, purgatory, yeah, that one, where I was possibly just not knowing what I thought, but not really wanting to get too into it, or not delving too deep. I think I was looking for some friendship. That's what I missed, because I remember feeling chronically lonely when I left, and I had a baby, and obviously my marriage had split up, so I was like really alone, and you can't really go out with a baby on, like have a social life is what I mean. Obviously you go to shops. So I remember just being really chronically alone. So I think JWD filled a bit of a gap, but I didn't take too much of the heavy detail from it. But the time when I typed in Jehovah's Witnesses into the Google bar was quite some period after I'd like drifted away.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember finding one thing after another, after another, after another, and being breathless, like I couldn't believe what I was finding. So one of the things that I found was the Menlo congregation in California, where the elders were in a legal fight over the ownership of the Kingdom Hall, because it was on such an expensive piece of California prime land. And that kind of shocked me.
Yeah, the Menlo Park, if anyone hasn't
That's it.
heard of that, that's a fascinating account, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
makes you realise that it's more about money than you ever thought. And it wasn't that the elders were being greedy grabbers, in my opinion. When I read the whole account, and like you find an article and then you try and find more articles and you sort of try and triangulate your knowledge about it, they felt that they'd been robbed by the society, because they save up, they buy the land and the hall, and then the society assume ownership of it. And then I think they wanted to sell it, and the elders, who are the trustees, so once you're on the body of elders, you're a trustee of the congregation, suddenly realized that they were being robbed of like millions of dollars.
Yes, yes. And if I'm remembering it correctly, I think the circuit overseer did not make things easy. I think he was perhaps a young gun who was very opinionated. Can't just remember his name, but I did read the account, and it just felt like this was not a man who. This was perhaps not the most reasonable circuit overseer you could come across.
Right. So he exacerbated things.
Possibly.
And that's interesting because you would have never have come across that account had it not been for the internet, right? That would have been, it would have happened over in California and we would never heard of it. Maybe a couple of congregations nearby would have heard of it. But suddenly something that's quite egregious can then become a news article and anybody can read about it. So I found that really interesting. The other thing that I found, this must have come later, the United Nations thing, becoming a member of the United Nations, and then the Guardian writing an article about it, and then the Watchtower responding and saying, oh, well, we were only a member to get access to the United Nations library, which is a brilliant resource. And then witnesses individually not ex-witnesses were phoning up the UN library and saying, is this true? Do you need to be? And the libraries had to put a statement out and go, no, you don't need to be a member to have access to our books and resources. And then the Watchtower responding again by withdrawing their membership.
Yes. I think Watchtower was quite slow on the uptake because the more I think about it, the more the internet has taken a lot of power away from the Jehovah's Witness organization, because they used to have this power where they would tell you something. They would write things in a Watchtower article and you would have no choice but to believe it because you could not verify it or call it out as a lie or an embellishment because the internet didn't exist. Nowadays, or since sort of 2000 onwards, you can check everything and you can verify sources, or you can see that sources perhaps have not been quoted correctly. So it has taken a lot of power away from Watchtower.
And how would you ever find the phone number of the United Nations library in wherever it is? Europe, somewhere. How would you ever find that without the internet? Like, you go down Gloucester Library and look in the telephone books. I remember going down Gloucester Library to try and find a telephone number of somebody in Kent, and like literally pulling the physical telephone book out for Kent. They had the whole country, and like running your finger down the list. Well, you'd never find that kind of information without the internet, so you'd never been able to verify whether that story was correct or not. So it kept on going because people kept fact checking because they could, because don't you want to know, is this right or not?
So was there a favorite website that you came across when you were doing your research? Was there any good resources that you can point people to?
No, not that I can remember. I think I kept just finding news articles. So not necessarily a particular website, but like the Menlo Park, it was just reported in that local newspaper for that area. And then once you've got a bit of detail, like, you know, the name of the area, then you start Googling around it and you might find a different news article from a different source that's telling the same story. So I think I was still wary of websites per se that were packed with content just about Jehovah's Witnesses, because I guess I thought, oh, well, you've got an agenda that you want to just criticize this organization. So I tended to stick to articles. Like I said, the one about the United Nations was, I remember the journalist's name from The Guardian, and I found his article there. Because I wrote to him later, several years later, to ask him if he'd researched something else, and he said, I would, but I'm just up to my neck in a story that's going to break about phone hacking. And it was the same guy that broke the phone hacking scandal.
Oh,
I think
right.
he's called Bates. Yeah, he's an amazing journalist. So no, I tended to stick to sources that I thought were fairly reliable. Now, I know in the post-truth world, people would now say that the BBC isn't reliable, but I tended to find, you know, back in 2000s, if it was on the BBC, if it was a news article written about something that had happened, I would believe that it had happened. If it was a panorama documentary, I would believe, because they do a lot of research. If it was a local newspaper article. After that, later, I came to, oh, crumbs, there was a website that I liked, run by Paul Grundy in Australia. Who's the name of the website? I can't remember.
It's called,
but when I do remember, I'll put it in the show notes.
avoidjw.com, is it?
No, I think that's run by that guy in Ireland, I think.
Oh, is it? Sorry.
JW Facts.
AW Facts, that's Paul Grundy's.
Yes.
That is
Yes,
super
that's Paul
website.
Grundy's, and it's a really good one because he really doesn't embellish. He just tries to put stuff that's been published by the Watchtower Society.
Yeah, it's a
Mm.
superb resource that I use that quite often just to check things. And you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. I think he's made a point of quoting from Watchtower publications.
yeah, and not kind of writing hyperbole and text and opinion and bringing his own agenda to it. So it feels factual and reliable. The first thing I read that I really felt was reliable was Crisis of Conscience.
How did you find that
Uh,
book?
my dad lent it to me, bizarrely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Governing body member, Raymond Franz.
Raymond Franz, yes. Yeah, because again, he was very religious himself. Even after he'd left, he still had a very strong belief in God, and his book is written from a very strong point of faith. And I think that lands well with people when they're researching, because it doesn't he's not really critical. He points out the things that are wrong, that are verifiably wrong. He has all the receipts, all the documents and evidence are printed in the back of his book.
Mm.
But he's not a bitter or angry writer. He's very lovely, gentle, respectful.
It must have been quite something for him to write that book, because he had served so many years as almost one of the backbone members of the organization on the governing bodies, and he exposed the organization through his book. So he must have had mixed feelings when he was writing it.
Yeah, he must have wrestled with himself a lot, don't you think?
I understand that it's a bit of a side point, this, but if anyone hasn't read the book, it is superb. I bought it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I've read it 2 or 3 times now. And I believe that Raymond Franz was the reason that the modern disfellowshipping arrangement came into place. It was something to do with when the organization realized that Raymond Franz was exposing them or doing his own research and finding inconsistencies, they wanted to isolate him and not allow witnesses to associate with him. So they
Yes.
disfellowshipped him, they kicked him out. And I believe that is where the kind of modern iteration of disfellowshipping got its current form, because of
Right.
Raymond Franz.
And they then disfellowshipped somebody who put him up, because obviously if you've worked for the organisation all your life, you're skillless, penniless and homeless, which he was when he left, and somebody put him up, and then they disfellowshipped that person as well. They were really putting a massive firewall around him, like, do not touch this guy at all.
Yeah, they were trying to amputate the leg, weren't they? They were trying to save the organization by completely cutting off the part of it that they viewed as infected and poisoned.
Yeah. So I did read that, but I think it was the internet and researching that really made me think a lot. And it made me, like, it gave me this, I still have this enduring feeling that I struggle to trust anything, because I describe it like being in the Truman Show.
Yeah, Jim Carrey.
It felt to me, after I'd been through that process, that I'd been living in the Truman Show, and it really rocked my world and took the floor from underneath me in a very permanent kind of a way. And I struggle now to believe, like, say, I struggle at school to believe that the person who runs the school knows what they're doing. I struggle to believe that somebody at the top of a corporation is knowledgeable and cleverer than anybody else. I struggle to have trust in anybody, because I've got this gnawing doubt that everything's rubbish.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think coming out of an organization where suddenly you see that you've not been told the truth, I can understand where that feeling comes from.
Yeah, and in such a fundamental and all-encompassing way, like your entire life. If you've been born in, your entire life is shaped and determined and dictated by this worldview. And then when you do find things that, you're always going to find stuff that has, well, maybe give it the benefit of the doubt. But there are a few things that come with the receipts and you think, no, that's absolutely bona fide, totally different to what I'd been led to believe. Like, for instance, the brothers and sisters in Bulgaria who are allowed blood transfusions and other countries aren't. That's irrefutably, is it right or is it wrong? You can't have both. But apparently you can have both if a government threatens you with legal action. So those kind of things made me think more about that worldview that I had.
Do you think that were you surprised that the Jehovah's Witness organization then embraced the internet and ploughed money into its website and became very internet focused when it comes to putting their message out? Did that surprise you?
Massively surprised me, because I suppose I'd left when it was still in its embryonic form and we were still being heavily warned against it. But I do get that it's so ubiquitous, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. You can't tell people not to go on the internet. I mean, you book your holidays, you book everything, you look at everything, you read everything, you research everything, you do everything online. I don't know how my life would function without my phone. So I suppose they had to.
I guess it would have been a difficult decision for them, because once you open that floodgate, it's difficult to close it or to regulate it. Because if you're saying, yes, we are using the internet as a central part of our worship and our religion, it does give license to people to use the internet even the least curious person in the world is surely occasionally going to think, oh, I wonder what the answer to this question is about my religion. I think I'll check on the internet. It would take a very disciplined person to never stray from that.
And that's what I wonder now. Like, especially with young people, when, again, your whole life is lived interwoven with being online. So what I wonder is, when you sat in a meeting, if you sat at the back and you're, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, and you've got your iPad out and you're looking up the scriptures, but, have you got a browser open with Candy Crush on there? And have you got a browser open that you could just type something in, somebody mentions something and you're not sure, you could Google it. And I can't see that wouldn't happen. And how do people manage that?
Yeah, and I think it possibly answers the question as to why there are so many physically in, mentally out witnesses, because
Right.
you only need to go. I sort of use the XJW Reddit forum just to see what's going on, and there's a lot of people in the organization posting anonymously on there who say, oh, I've got to go to an assembly this weekend, I'm going to be bored, how can I get out of it? Listening to the same thing over and over again. And there's a lot of people who are physically in but have actually mentally checked out of the organization because of what they've learnt over the internet.
Yes, and I was aware through COVID, obviously it was a great resource when people couldn't attend in person, that you could tap in online, couldn't you, and join and via your iPad from home, which people did. But I think, well, I think I had a friend that was on those Reddit boards a lot, and she said there are loads of young people that are discovering that they don't want to be part of that organization anymore in this gap where they didn't have to go to meetings, but they were like tapping into the meetings but just leaving it on the side and then going and doing whatever whatever you do, have your dinner or something. And she said, but they're talking about themselves as if they've left when COVID's over, which it is now, and they have to go back to the meetings. How are they going to manage that? Because it's all right leaving behind an iPad where you don't have to actually come out to anyone and say you've left, but to then refuse to say go to meetings or refuse to go out on field service because you feel that you can no longer support that. That's a massive difference, isn't it?
It is, and I guess those people would feel quite lonely as well, because unless they live with a person that maybe their partner or a member of the family is on the same page as them, they can't really talk to anyone about it unless they do so anonymously online. Be interesting to if anybody listening to our podcast is having that experience, write into our email address and tell us about it, because it must be quite difficult for you to exist like that.
It would be so interesting to hear from someone that's having to straddle that world, because that must be so difficult and lonely. I've got a friend who's willing to be interviewed, and he got disfellowshipped because he posted in what he thought was a closed Facebook group a genuine question, asking for a friend, something about atheism, because he wasn't, he wasn't looking to leave, but he had questions, and he'd found a Facebook group that he thought was closed, and it wasn't. I suppose it was quite a few years ago, and we were very naive at the advent of social media. And another witness saw it, and they disfellowshipped him, and he's got his disfellowshipping certificate. Didn't know you got a certificate for it, but you do, and he has it up on his wall framed, and that's the reason, because he was questioning.
It's sad that asking a question gets you that kind of punishment. It turned out well for him, I suppose, because he's out of the organisation now. But yeah, it would be great to have him on the podcast. So he's agreed to be interviewed, has he? Excellent.
Yeah.
Our first interviewee.
I know, yeah. Yeah,
And
it's funny, my mum said quite a few years ago, she was out on field service with the circuit overseer, and she raised a question, and he said to her, "You're on dangerous ground there." And she said, I shut up and I didn't pursue it any further. But years later, when she left, she said, what on earth what was dangerous ground? It was a genuine question expressed to a circuit overseer. So, she wasn't like going round covertly rumbling about something that she didn't disagree with. She was asking him, and he closed it down and said, "You're on dangerous ground there." And she said, I just clammed up and thought, oh, okay, I won't take this any further.
Wow. That's almost like living in fear, isn't it, of being able to ask a question.
It's very dystopian, isn't it?
It is, yes. You just mentioned earlier about COVID being sort of the time that FaceTime or whatever it was, I think it was Skype, was it, that was used at congregation meetings?
Right.
Do you think COVID has perhaps added to the damage that the internet has done to the organisation?
Intuitively and with no facts to hand whatsoever, they're just talking out of my backside, which I do most of the time anyway. I feel like it has, because I think there would have been a great excitement to start with, that this was perhaps the beginning of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or the beginning of the Great Tribulation. It would have been hugely exciting in a macabre kind of a way. I was excited by COVID, and I didn't think it was the start or finish of anything. I just said to my son, you enjoy this. You'll never get a year off school again. This is a moment in history. Just enjoy it. And he did, bless him. And then I think, obviously, when COVID ended, there would have been, for some people, a massive disappointment that it hadn't triggered the prophecies about the end of the system of things. And then in the middle of all that, there were all the people who were able to sit back from the meetings and have a bit of space in their head to think about things. And I think, as you say, I think that would have generated quite a few people that perhaps didn't want to identify as witnesses anymore, but didn't know how to step away.
Yes, I think I agree with you on that. I wonder what it felt like to be told you don't have to go on the ministry.
Oh my God, I would have been so relieved.
I'm sure there were millions that were relieved.
Like I pioneered, like the more I disliked it, the more I forced myself to do it because it felt like the right thing. But my body screamed out against it. It was so hard engaging every single person that was indifferent or hostile or even worse, sympathetically kind but not interested. It was so hard.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, if someone can write in and tell us what that was like from the inside, that would be an amazing insight. And
Yeah, it would.
also the sort of time period where people were being told, right, COVID's nearly over now, you have to get back out on the ministry. I'd imagine that was quite a tricky time for a number of people.
That would have been a huge disappointment, because if you were winding up to thinking this is it, this is the great tribulation, and then Armageddon, and then paradise, and we don't have to go out on field service, and God's going to do all the hard work now, and then to be told, oh wait, no, false start, we're back to it, lads, would have been like, it's really hard once you stop doing something like going to the gym or going for a run, speaking from experience. Once you stop, it's just so horrible to go back to it.
So hard to get started again, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you think the internet has spelled the end of new recruits in first world countries where people have sophisticated access to it?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the title or the subject of our next podcast is about the statistics and statistics on internet usage in each country and that. And from what I understand of the figures is that countries like the US and the UK and France, where the internet, the saturation level of the internet is in the high 90%, 90% more of homes have got the internet. The numbers of witnesses is not increasing by much, or it's decreasing. And I think that the real areas of growth for the organization are in Africa, where the internet usage figures are some of the lowest on the planet. I think there's a very clear correlation of the more people that have internet, the less chance of them joining the witnesses.
Yeah, or probably anything. I mean, if if I'm in town and I see somebody with a stall and they're going, for instance, almonds cures cancer, the first thing I'm going to do is go home and Google it. Do almonds cure cancer? If somebody's like, oh, you want to take this pill, it's like loses you weight. The first thing I'm going to do is go home and Google, does this pill really lose you weight? The first thing I do about any piece of information is try and triangulate and look it up, which obviously you couldn't do years ago, but now you can. So before, when we were knocking on people's doors, it was kind of, believe me, don't believe your lying eyes. Like, here I am telling you what's right. But now people can triangulate, and notwithstanding the fact that the internet is full of garbage as well as full of news, you can still look stuff up.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, going back to your question, I think the internet probably is almost the death knell of the organization. I think it will die a long, slow death. I think that began with the internet age.
Yeah, I agree. So you've got quite a big family, haven't you? So you must have people at every generational level within your family. And I know a lot of your family are still in. Are there younger people? Do you have nephews and nieces that are younger?
Well, actually, no, I've not got. There was 5 children, so I was the middle of 5 children, but I haven't really a big family. So I didn't know any of my extended family really. So roughly half of my family is still in the religion and half is out. I don't really know, because I don't really speak to the ones that are out that much.
Right.
I don't really know what their view is. I'm not really sure on that.
Is there an age thing about who's in and who's out?
So the eldest 3 children are out and the youngest 2 children are in.
Now, that's exactly the opposite of what I would have expected. So there you go. Just pulling things out of my head without any recourse to the facts. Never let the facts spoil a good story. That's what I say.
I mean, I think there are probably some other reasons, which I won't go into, for the older 3 of us being out as well and the younger 2 being in. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of folk out there who are maybe under the age of 25 who, let's face it, they've never known a world without the internet and the answer being at your fingertips.
Yeah.
So they must have a very different view on the world and truth and post-truth than us dinosaurs do.
Yeah, us OGs. And also, I think as well, like the internet, you can find groups of people like yourself, can't you? Whatever your jam is, there's a
Yeah.
group of people that are into it. And so years ago, if you were, say, gay as a witness, you either suffered with depression and became a self-loathing gay or commit suicide, or you left, but leaving was hard. Whereas now you can look up groups, support groups, you can find other people, you can find support groups of people like you who have left the group that you were in. It's very specific. There'll always be a group. And so I think perhaps for young people growing up now who are much more gender curious and gender fluid than I remember people being, the support groups and networks that you can tap into online. And I think that's probably a factor that maybe people who've got identities that they would struggle with in a high control group, there's much more support for them now and they can access that via the internet, and maybe they would be more enabled to leave rather than just suffer with lifelong depression.
Yes, I think it's very true that, and I'm sure there will be listeners that are currently Jehovah's Witnesses and are wanting to be anything but and want to leave, but their entire support network and all of their family are still Jehovah's Witnesses, so they kind of feel trapped. I think what you've just said is the way for them to go. It's not the way I did it, and I found it quite hard, but build up that support network through online contacts, through people that you work with, because the only sort of less painful way to leave the organization, if that's what you want to do, is by having some kind of support network out of it.
And I wonder if an online support network doesn't feel quite as immediately frightening as maybe going out with real life people from work. Like, you're online, you can switch your computer off and sever the connection quickly if you get anxious. Whereas if you're building friendships with real people at work who aren't witnesses, that's quite frightening, I think, when you're in, because you're building a human connection and you shouldn't be doing that. But online, there's a bit of distance, so you can kind of get a bit of connection and support, but feel in control of it a bit.
Yes, if you meet worldly people in real life, then the elders might see you. They might pull you into the back room. Hopefully,
whereas if you go online, that's very private, isn't it? You can manage it yourself. You can, keep it confidential.
And it's all about what a person feels comfortable with, isn't it? Because every family situation will be different, and some people might feel, oh, actually, if I go to the next town, I can behave a bit more freely and mix with whatever people I want. And other people will be quite well known in their area, and they'll think, oh, online.
Can't do that. I can't be seen. Yeah, online's the way to go.
Yeah,
so when I started looking online, I would say it probably took me 48 hours where I was like researching, just solid, barely sleeping. And at the end of that period, I felt very, very different to how I'd felt at the beginning of that period. And not in a negative, oh, it's robbed me of my faith, now I have nothing way. More in a positive, oh my goodness, I've just realized a load of stuff that I didn't even know existed that has been actively hidden from me. And it felt, obviously it's devastating to find things out, but it felt positive overall. It didn't feel like I'd been robbed of anything. It felt like I'd been added to in my knowledge.
It almost sounds, the way you describe it there, that you did a detox.
Yeah, I'm going to add that into my personal narrative of what happened. It did feel like a detox. It felt like a healthy version of when people go down a conspiracy rabbit hole and end up as really, really frighteningly deluded, like the kind of the YouTube algorithm that ends up making you think the government are lizard people. Well, I know that's happened to people in 48 hours. Well, it happened to me in 48 hours, but it was positive for me.
Wow. I mean, that's not a long period of time, is it, to suddenly almost see the light, have that light bulb moment?
Yeah, it's not a long period of time, and I think that's partly why you kind of end up with CPTSD, because of the sudden like whiplash jolt from one worldview to another, like the Truman guy hitting the wall at the edge and like
Mm.
knocking on the wall and realizing his whole world is just a big dome. That whiplash moment of realizing there's a different truth to your existence is weird.
Yeah, quite disconcerting and quite scary. I can remember when I left, I did feel relief. I felt relief that I didn't have to go on the ministry anymore. I felt relief that I didn't have to pretend to enjoy the meetings anymore.
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
relief I had all this free time back that was spent doing things in the organization. But I also felt quite scared because I didn't build up that support network, and like going into the unknown, it really was.
Whereas I'd left and wasn't suddenly left with lots of free time. I kind of drifted away and really was aimless in life for quite some time. So for me, the learning about it helped ease a lot of my guilt at what I was doing with my life and was it the right thing. I felt overwhelming guilt, which is obviously a tactic that is used to stop you leaving, to ensure that you feel guilty. And I dutifully felt masses and masses of guilt. Researching helped me work through some of that.
Yeah, proving to yourself what you're learning is definitely something that, in my experience, you kind of don't have any confidence that you can think for yourself, because you're told what to think at the meetings, you're told what to think in the magazines and the publications. So it's a totally different concept to actually do some research yourself, do some critical thinking, and think, actually, I've just come to this conclusion, and it's not what the witnesses would agree with, but it seems like it's the truth for me. That's quite a moment of realization, that.
Yes, it is. It's a moment of taking power, because you are actually, well, we're actually told, do not lean upon your own understanding, aren't we? We're told the heart of man is treacherous. Do not lean upon your own understanding. So you're divorced from your own instincts. So you kind of, it's almost like being an alcoholic, where you're drinking to numb what your body's trying to tell you. So you put a divide between your brain and your body. You don't listen to your gut instincts. You don't listen to what your body's telling you. You don't acknowledge that you might dislike something, or you find something creepy, or you find something doesn't hang right, because you're actively suppressing that and saying, well, my heart is treacherous, so I mustn't lean upon my own understanding. And then when you do reach that point where you start listening to your instincts and you do some research and you find facts that back up what your body's been trying to tell you, it's quite a huge relief. But it takes, just like going into therapy where people have disassociated, or they're using addiction to split themselves off from the body. It takes a long time to start listening to your body again and start trusting your instincts. And because you feel guilty for leaning upon your own understanding, because you've been told all your life that that's wrong. Do not lean upon your own understanding. Your heart is treacherous. So it takes a lot of courage to start listening to your body again and listening to your gut.
It's very true, that, yeah. During my time in the organisation, I had asked some questions to people that I sort of trusted within the organisation. The reaction I mostly got was almost like one of, oh, you've been thinking. You shouldn't be. You shouldn't be thinking with your own brain. That's not what you do.
Yeah. And they'll trot those two scriptures out. The heart of man is treacherous. You can't trust what you're thinking because your heart's treacherous. I mean, that's kind of really training you to self-gaslight.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a crazy way to live. when you look back. But then when you're in it and you're surrounded by people who are also obeying everything that you're told to obey, then it doesn't seem so crazy, does it?
No, and it seems terrifying to. It's like leaving a really bad marriage. When you're in it, you just daren't. You think there's no options. I'm stuck here forever. I'm powerless. I'm terrified. I'm miserable, but I don't know what to do. And then there's a point where you have left, and then you look back and you think, wow, what was I terrified of? This is the best. This was a good move for me. This is a healthy move. But yeah, I can see exactly both sides being stuck in something and then being on the other side of it and wondering why you were stuck.
Yeah, hindsight is very clear.
So to wrap up then, internet, good thing or bad thing for the witnesses?
Overall, I would say a bad thing. I think the organisation has seen its positives, and they have a website which I've got to admit is slick and user friendly, and you can find information that you're looking for very quickly. But they have opened the door to the internet to their members. They've normalized it after being against it for quite a while. And I think overall it's a bad thing. It will lead to, well, it has been leading to people fact checking and finding out the real truth about the organization for a number of years now. And I think that will only just increase.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they didn't have a choice. I think there was no other way to go but to try to embrace it and hope that they could control people enough to use it in the way that they stipulated. But obviously it's a many-headed hydra, and people are going to use it how they're going to use it. And young people, it's just embedded into their life, isn't it? Myself among those people as well, because I'm very young at heart.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And perhaps one thing just to add to that is that the one trick that seems to be used quite effectively by the organisation now is that because a lot of their new information is online, they can pull it whenever they wish. So there was a video about shunning, about disfellowshipping, and that was on the website. And it was quite an eye-opener. It was about I think it was the parents, and they were shunning their daughter because she'd left the organisation and they wouldn't answer her phone call.
Yes.
And the organisation took a little bit of heat in the media in one country about the video, saying that it was putting out a message that was kind of inhumane, which we know is. The video disappeared.
They used to send stickers out, didn't they? They used to tell you to which bits to sticker over in publications that they didn't want. That's really old school, isn't it? Don't read this anymore. Put a sticker over page 42, line 3.
Yeah, it's not like that anymore.
Not like that anymore. You can just pull it. You can rewrite history. Who said it? Was it George Orwell or somebody said he who can rewrite history? I'm making this quote up now. I said it. He who can rewrite history controls people's minds. I said that.
Was it the victor always writes for history or something?
You said that.
Yeah. They can control everything on that website. So if that is what the witnesses are using these days, something can be there today and gone tomorrow.
That's a really good point. Yeah, interesting. Right, so we've got our next podcast lined up about the data. And then if we can fit one in before Christmas, another one. Look at me. I would quite like to talk about how people navigate Christmas when they've left, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable doing Christmas. So that's an idea that we can talk about as well.
Excellent, because it can be a difficult time of year for witnesses in general, but also witnesses who are mentally out of the organisation. So yeah, really good idea that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you to our 2 listeners for listening to our great show. Hope you enjoy the music at the end, the last 30 seconds from Simon Endicott. Nice little song. Look it up on the interweb. It's called You're Not Who You Say You Are. And thank you, Adam, for another show.
Thank you very much, Louise, and goodbye for now.